I always love that sound. It means we're getting ready to do something fun. Oh man, we got some participants joining us, which is it's always a good thing when you do a webinar, kind of a live webinar, especially for those of us in uh, on the East Coast time zone here in the United States. We're catching that noon hour. Hopefully grabbing some people from their lunch
Yeah.
break and whatnot. So
Oh
I'm
man,
excited.
you got a ton of people there.
Yeah, we're getting quite a few join us, which is awesome. And what's funny is that Hugh, I don't think they keep coming back for me. I think they're coming back for everyone
Don't
else, right?
don't don't sell yourself short.
I love it, man. Well, we have as they're starting to pour in, we are excited today to bring our first. This is actually our first webinar, our live webinar series with a coach from the field, right? Someone who's actually using Onform, specifically looking for how are you using the app, maybe tips and tricks while you're using the app. And then we want to dive into just watch you authentically use the app. I mean, obviously we're live, so we're not able to pull in a live lesson, so to speak. But super excited to have Hugh Marr. He's our one of our OG on-form users, actually, one of our early adopters. You've been with us for quite a while now. Comes to us from the UK. He's very well respected in the industry, and we're really excited to have you join us. So, welcome, Hugh.
Thanks, Nate. You've made me sound way more impressive than I am in reality.
Well, the crowd went wild. I know you didn't hear that, but the crowd went wild
I
when
could almost hear it.
I, I know, right? Right. You must have went on mute or something. But yeah, they were going nuts when I announced your name. But let's see if my screen sharing is working. So we'll go into just get a little bit about you, and then the process that I was thinking is like some of the things I want to go over is just kind of the three main things when you tell anyone about OnForm. It's record, analyze, and share. We try and keep OnForm as just simple and basic as possible, but we're starting to filter in and pepper in some of these really cool technical pieces as well. And so I want to get into with you. Just we'll start with recording. Where do you set up and that kind of stuff? Then we'll go into analyzing. How are you drawing
So,
lines? Things like that. Go ahead.
I think that the most important principle in terms of my coaching and use of video is that this is very much my opportunity to look at golf swings in forensic detail.
Mm,
And I think that for that to be possible, there has to be two or three non-negotiables. Number one, that the camera angles need to be consistent. So I have my tripod set up. They're in the same place. Players sit from the same spot. And I'm viewing from three angles, which you'll see a little bit later, from the caddy view from front on down the line, and what I call spectator view from behind. So the first thing is making sure that we've got consistent camera angles. Now,
mhm,
all the great coaches I'm lucky enough to spend time with, they all have a slightly different take on their camera angle. They're slightly different, but there is that one common thread that they are consistently in the same place. That's number one. On a
mhm,
tripod, number two. Number three, ensuring that you're working at the fastest shutter speed that you can, that your light will allow.
mhm,
And number four, which is I think is a really quite important tip, if you like, that being slightly further away from the player when you're filming is more beneficial than being slightly too close. If you're
mm,
further away, you can always zoom in, but if you're too close, you can't zoom out.
mhm.
So you'll see from the videos that I present in a little while that I'm a reasonable distance from the player, probably 4 meters, 4.5 meters from the player.
Okay.
Now, as I said, I when I use video, it's an analysis and diagnosis tool for me. So there's very much a process that I go through, and that first process is what I call the golfer analysis. So I'm just watching the player hit golf balls. I'm looking at how the player moves. I'm seeing the ball in the air. I'm hearing the club on the ground. I'm seeing how deep it is in the ground. I'm just basically taking in all this. I guess you'd call them softer skills. I'm viewing this golfer kind of globally, looking at the
Mhm.
rhythm, the tempo, the timing. And while I'm doing this, I'm generally quite a long way from the player. I'm just kind of taking in the whole experience. So that's what I call this kind of subjective analysis. That is me just looking at the golfer as a human being and seeing how they function. The
And
minute I
and
get
Hugh,
on video,
I'm gonna pause you there. You're doing that
mm,
without video. That's just you taking in the sights and sounds and smells, right? And
Correct.
feels without any technology. Like we're just
Correct.
going to analyze without anything. Then
Correct.
you go to what I think I was interrupting you. Then you go to the next phase.
Well, and that's in the next phase. But the golfer analysis is much more the kind of the touchy feely, if you like, the more
Hmm.
just studying the human element of it. When I go into the next phase, which I call my machine analysis, then I
Hmm.
am looking at this in a very, very forensic manner.
Okay.
And at this point, I stop seeing a golfer. So in my messed up little mind, I first of all study what the club is doing. I've got the impact data. I know what the club is doing to the ball, but I want to know how the club has arrived at that destination, because there are obviously some optimum ways to do that and some less than optimum ways to do that. But
Hmm.
when I get into that video analysis phase, I'm now looking at the club in space and I'm viewing the golfer as an avatar.
Hmm.
This is how I've kind of organized it in my tiny little brain, that I don't want to see a golfer and have my opinion skewed by the form. I want to know
Hmm.
what the club is doing, and then I want to know how the player is putting the club in that place. So it's a very, very distinct process. And
So you're very mechanical when you go through this process, meaning there's steps that you're going through. You're observing the golfer in space and looking at the divot and just observing them.
mm-hmm,
Then you're taking the analysis, the machine or the machine analysis.
mm-hmm,
I've got my notes over here, Hugh, just so you know, I'm stealing everything you're saying.
that's fine.
You're taking the machine analysis and you're getting your launch data,
Yep.
which is obviously another cog in the wheel. It's another
Mm-hmm,
tool we're utilizing. Then you're adding the video piece, which is obviously why we're here, having this conversation, which helps you then to give a diagnosis to the golfer, almost like a full diagnosis. I've seen, I've felt, I've heard, I've smelled. Here's what some data is showing me, and now here I'm going to validate everything for you, the golfer, through video.
correct. This
Is
is
that is
so
that?
that effectively the the what is happening is this analysis phase. When I start to diagnose a student, that's me exploring why this is happening, and that's where video starts to come in, because I know the club is
Mhm.
approaching the ball in a certain manner, and I also know that I need the club to approach the ball in a different manner. So
Mm.
that's me exploring the why. And the reality is that it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a top 50 player in the world or you're dealing with a beginner. For golfers to hit good shots, the club must be in a specific space.
Mhm.
We know that you can't hit a functioning shot off the ground if the low point is behind the ball and the player is hitting up in it.
Mhm.
So everything I'm doing from this point on is geared around identifying which of the impact factors needs to shift, or which one can I shift and get the others for free, and then I'm
Mhm.
exploring how I can do that. And that's where
Mm. Okay.
the analysis, the analysis and diagnosis is driven by the data, but ultimately all that is data gathering. The actual
Mm.
coaching bit has to come as a product of diagnosing correctly.
Yeah. I think what I love, I mean, obviously, I love everything that you're saying. And by default, I've witnessed you do multiple of these conversations online. I've been a part of a couple with you in person. So I know how you analyze, I know the lines you draw, I know the angles you take, and I love everything about that. What I'd love to do next now is I'm gonna kick it over to you for sharing. So and while we're going through that, while you're getting ready to bring up your library and talk, you go ahead and take over there for our participants, those who are online listening. What I am monitoring our Q&A section. So if you go over in your Zoom window and the Q&A, fire off questions as Hugh is going through stuff. We'll gather questions and answer on the fly, or we'll take some time at the end to answer questions as well. So please feel free to jump on and ask questions as you go. We're looking forward to a good conversation. So Hugh, why don't we just start here? We talked about the record, analyze, and share from Onform's perspective. We've got the golfer analysis, the machine analysis, and then the diagnosis piece from Hugh's perspective. Let's get in and talk about the recording side of things. So you've observed the golfer, you've gone through that type of a thing. Now we're getting into the machine piece, and not the launch monitor, but the machine of the video. So why don't you go ahead and start sharing your screen, and
That
we'll.
should be sharing now, Nate.
I think you are good to go. I hope. Let me stop
Excellent.
sharing mine so I can see yours. Let's do it. So let's talk to me about your recording. One thing you said is non-negotiables. It must be in the same position. It must be on the tripod, or we use those iRange monopod sticks.
Same.
But whatever, yeah, you use those too. iRange is a great function, and we can throw a link in for what we use with them. It's amazing little stand that we use. But talk to us about your angles. I love how you have three views that you love to capture.
So the tripod's the same height every time, regardless of player. Simple reason being that I've got consistency there. If I'm shooting the same player 10 times over who's 6'6", I'm going to get the same angle as 10 times over at 5'6".
Okay.
So this is at my belly button height, and it's shot perpendicular to the line of play into the player's midriff. That's basically
Hmm.
the camera angle here. Now, when I look at it from down the line, and again, there seems to be there's always going to be a little bit of debate about this. It's parallel to the line of play, same tripod height, and I'm shooting basically through the hands. Now,
Hmm.
the reason that I shoot through the hands, I know there's coaches that shoot down the line of play, and I know there's coaches that shoot down the leg line. The reason it's down the hands is I know what the club is doing from a measurement perspective, so I can't measure how the club is behaving here. I already know that. This gives me a good perspective of the club structure versus the arm structure versus the body structure throughout. And again, it really doesn't matter what your preferred camera angle is, as long as it is the same every single time. And then I'll
So
have
so you've got the
go
two angles that are the same every time. I imagine if we were to if we were to fly over there and see, you kind of leave your eye range sticks or you
correct,
leave them in the position unless you're going in and
correct.
out,
They
setting
get
up
they
for the
get
day.
correct. They get set up first thing in the morning.
Got
This
it.
is an angle I use an awful lot for primarily for start position. But again, it's shot from the same height, again, perpendicular to the line of play, and shot again into the midriff. So they're the camera angles. What you will notice, to my point earlier about being far away from the player, is it's very easy for me to work in if I want to see in minute detail. You see some of these videos that I get sent, and I'm like, well, there's really not really much I can do with that. That's a bad
Hmm.
example. You see the people that I've worked with over a long period of time, they tend to shoot from far away. It's such a it's
That's
such
a
a
good
small
point
point.
too, Hugh. That's a really good point. When your players are sending you videos, I
Mm-hmm.
would imagine you're teaching and instructing them, you're educating them. Here is exactly where I want video shot and sent to me. If I'm looking at yesterday's videos from David Park,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't look like your facility.
No,
Am I safe in saying that that was sent to you?
yes, and the good thing is that David's a good friend of mine. He was a winner on tour. He played on tour for 15 years, and he's just decided to get back into golf. And
Mm.
he watched my Instagram post about camera angles and actually delivered on it. A little bit too close, but then the facility has restricted him a bit there. But when you
Hmm.
start to see some of these camera angles that you get sent by players, they're just they're just not functional. And if
Mm.
you're gonna look at golfers, there needs to be a consistency to what you're doing, because this is, as I said, in my coaching, this is very much a forensic analysis tool. It is definitely not a here's a good example. So what on earth do you do with those
Mm.
cameras?
You
This
say,
is
I hope you say it looks like a beautiful day for golf. That's what you
correct.
send back to him, right?
This is this this is a PGA Master Pro who's just been awarded Coach of the Year in the state of Oregon, and he sent me
Love
that.
it.
So
I love it.
I gave him a real hard time for that.
I love that. I love that. So as you're looking at this, while going back to another thing you mentioned that I loved is you're talking about just the angles. You've got face on, down the line, and then player or spectator view, I think you called it. I could be off on
Yeah,
that, participant view.
that would be
Also
spectacular.
love that. Yeah, spectator view, because any tour event you go to, this is really what we're getting to see is most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really interesting to think of it this route. Then you talked about shutter speed. You talked about the fastest shutter speed. Maybe walk us through kind of what you're looking for, ways that you record as well.
If you get the shutter speed quick enough, and I know this club is swinging at 97 miles an hour, you can see how clean the shaft and the head is.
Mm.
That helps me look at club behavior. Now, if we go back to dear old David,
Poor David.
poor David, what can I do with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So now the only option I have is to look at start position and movement, because there's no feedback I can get from the club behavior there. And even when you
Yeah.
look at down the line, it'll be the same thing. Let me see where I've got a good down the line example of this is Jim down the line, that I can get a slightly better idea down the line,
Hmm.
but still the lack of shutter speed makes it next to impossible to make any judgment call on club behavior then. So my emphasis would have to go solely on body movement.
Mm. So your shutter speed is obviously something that is mission critical, is what I would say for you as an instructor, as a
Yep.
coach. Like you can obviously talk about body movement, but in golf we know we're only contacting the club with our hands. Everything else is manipulated, and what happens at the ball is all based off of starts with the body and rotational things. But then when you get down to what's happening at impact, we got launch data to help us, but then visualizing the shutter speed is huge. What type of modes are you recording in? Good, bad, and different. Onform gives you a lot of different options. Maybe talk to us about ones you love, some you use, don't. What about
The
that?
only one I use is the highest quality at the fastest shutter speed. Some
Okay.
240 frames a second. And assuming the daylight is decent, which it is not always the case here in the UK, but assuming the daylight is decent, then you will get something that presents with that quality.
Mm. Are you doing mostly like manual recording? Do you do one tap recording?
No, I use manual recording every time,
Okay.
simply because, and I'm quite diligent about this. When I trim the videos up, I want to be able to know exactly when the club starts moving. So you'll
Got it.
notice all the videos are generally 1 or 2 seconds long. All of the ones I've recorded are 1 or 2 seconds
Sure.
long. I trim them straight down to literally the movement. That's it.
That's all you need. Yeah. Which I love that one thing about, we've talked about this at a couple of shows we've been to. And met up just about the different recording options Onform gives. And I love that you're just going, Nate, manual. I know what I'm doing. Leave me alone. But then there's coaches out there that love the different availabilities, right? The one tap and things like that, which is kind of
Yeah.
cool.
And I think that, I mean, I've said this is a more general comment on the use of technology in coaching, that we now have a million options in
Hmm.
terms of video analysis tools, launch monitors, pressure plates, 3D systems. We've got so many
Hmm.
options out there, and broadly they all do much the same thing. But having a relationship with a piece of technology, I think, is really important, so that you understand the nuts and bolts of that, so that you become. I would like to become the best user of Onform.
Hmm.
That's I want to be able to master my technology, and it doesn't matter what you use. I'm
Hmm.
smart to move, I'm TrackMan, and I'm Onform.
Hmm.
I'm pretty confident that there's not many coaches on the planet doing a better job with those three pieces of technology. You give me a GC quad, and I'm going to look like just a complete novice.
Mm.
Become expert with the technology you've got.
Mm. And I've been able to witness that. Where were we at, Hugh? It was in Florida? Was it
Yeah,
Orlando?
it's Ledbetter's place, wasn't it?
Yeah, love that. That was awesome to see you become a master of each one of those. Let's move on. We've done some recording. This is fantastic. I'd love to let you go off on a tangent and talk about the analyzation piece. A lot of the coaches are wanting to see about the analyzation piece.
Okay, so I'm going to start by qualifying everything I'm about to talk about. That as a golf coach, I think it's crucial we have what I call baselines. So baselines are something by which you compare different golf swings in this instance. Now, baselines are not absolute. As you'll see when we work through a number of different swings here, everyone presents with different characteristics. But if you've got a baseline in mind, you can always compare to something. So you can say, for example, that ball position is a more back ball position or a more forward ball position. This is why I find the analysis tools in Onform so useful. So I'm going to start by getting the player on, and I'm going to look at start position. And I'm always going to be relating start position to the player's impact. So in this instance, we've got a player who he hits it very straight. He
Mm.
basically swings left, he feels fade, but he produces 4 left swing direction, 0 path, hitting down in at about 4.5 to 5 degrees with 7-iron. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw a box from the outside of the shoulders and drop it down to the feet. My
Hmm.
baseline there is that the outside of the shoulder line hits the inside, hits the middle of the feet. That's
Hmm.
the base. The other things I'm looking for here are how the player chooses to arrange his pelvis, and we'll see that more from the spectator view as well. Shoulders, eye line, knees. Just, I'm looking for what I call stack setup. I want the different body segments piled on top of one another. Finally, when I look at that, I will be looking at what happens with the player's head, which I would want centered in that box. So the baselines are, as I said, these are by no means absolute. We will see players that present with much more right side bend and their shoulders look more tilted. You'll see players who have the ball position in a fundamentally different place. Just key little checkpoints. I like to see as much space between the hip and the red line on both sides of the body. If anything, I would prefer to see the left hip closer. I would definitely not prefer to see the right hip closer, unless the player is presenting with some kind of spine deformity, which is quite common. I've coached a couple of players whose hips sit out from their whose hips sit this way from their torso. So I'm constantly being able to. I've got reference points all the way. Other little things I'm looking at, which don't necessarily require drawing tools, I'm looking at foot flare. You can't properly analyze foot flare unless you're shot front on and dead square to the player, or 90 degrees to the target line. I'm also looking for limb alignment. So I want to see the knobbly bit in the pelvis running straight through to the middle of the foot and hitting the middle of the knee. That is healthy limb alignment. As soon as you start to see the knees moving away from those lines, that will create movement issues.
Can I ask you a question on this? You mentioned when you first set up for the box and then you're looking for the two hip positions on either side. And you said I'd love to see it cheated a little forward on the lead hip, we'll call it. Are you looking for that for more of a post and to be able to turn around? Is that kind of the concept, or talk us through like what you're thinking there?
No, I mean, again, a lot of it will depend on shot shape. So this player presents with quite level shoulders. And he's trying to feel fade, so that those two marry up. If you had a player who's looking for draw, I might post the lead hip a little bit more this way, which would create just a fraction more tilt in the spine, which would be a draw bias characteristic. So there's the beauty of baselines is that, as I said, they're not absolutes. It's just saying, right, well, this is where the player is in space relative to my model. And there's so much wiggle room either side to match the player's physical capabilities, to match the shot shape they want to hit, to match their build, to match the conditions they play in. There's tons of variability. But you have to have this model in mind that you're comparing everything against so that you make consistent judgment calls for each and every player you work with. Looking at foot flare, I'm basically looking for about the same amount of foot flare in both feet. I categorically do not buy into the right foot or the trail foot being square and the lead foot opening up. The effect that has on movement and force generation is quite interesting. In terms of the arm structure, I'm basically looking for the arms as a baseline. I'm looking for both arms to be rotated about 135 degrees from one of the extremes, which this player does.
So when you're setting up, analyzing, I've seen you do this a bunch of times, but for those who are watching, I see on the right side your toolbox, right? The line, the box. Are those kind of like just no matter what player is in front of you, that's exactly what you're looking for every time? You put the box around,
the top,
shoulders to mid.
Correct. I'll start with, I'll always start with this. Okay, that will always be the start point because I'm looking to see how well I call it stacked. Then I'm just looking to see how healthy the head position is relative to the rest of the system. I'm going to look at the leg positions. I'm going to look at the tilts, and I'm going to look at the foot flare. That would be almost a absolute in terms of every lesson. The one thing I haven't mentioned to this point is how I'm going to build ball position into this. So I will drop a box down from the sternum and take it over to the lead shoulder. Now, as long as the ball is sat in that box, it is functional when the player is hitting it off the ground, but very dependent on what kind of golf swing the player presents with and what shot shape they want to hit. So anything that you see that side of the box is draw bias. Generally, that's going to be combined with more shaft lean. Anything you see that side of the box is more fade bias, and that would generally be presented with less shaft lean. So that, to me, pretty much boxes off everything I need to see from a start position perspective from the caddy view.
Okay. Take us to your next analyzing. Like, where do you go from here?
Okay, that just want to tidy this one up. Other little bits I'm looking for, again, just as guidelines. So we talked about sort of left hip and right hip. Another way of looking at it without the box is can you see an equal amount of both hips? Other little thing I look for again for tilts and for spine position is, can you see the belt buckle between the arms? So it's not just having that sort of hard and fast, this is how I look at it. There are other ways to explore it as well. And I find this particularly useful when I'm giving a player feedback as to what they need to do. I'll say to them, right, this is what you're looking for. When you stand in front of a mirror, I want to see you to be able to see the same amount of each hip and the belt buckle through the arms.
Got it. Now, what you got 3 angles here. Are you doing similar boxes and drawings on all 3 angles? Because we just saw the face on, maybe the other 2 quickly.
Well, let's look at the spectator view, because I think this is a really interesting view for some quite specific things. You can see the lower limb alignment really quite effectively there. Very good for seeing how much tilt the player carries through the pelvis. Very good for looking how much tilt the player carries through the shoulders. Also very good for looking at head tilts. So I'll use that an awful lot. Basically, I draw a line across the top of the ears, and I want to see it hitting the same point of both ear. That's from both a movement perspective and a health perspective. The other thing that I'll look at here is just general spine alignment. So while the spine from a down the line perspective carries 3 curves, C curve, T curve, and L curve, I want to see it straight from behind. So I'll basically take that from the top of his ass and run it through the top of his neck, and I want to see that his spine is correlating with that. I tend to use this angle primarily for setup, but also it's a very good angle for seeing where the player carries pressure through his feet. And it's also a very good angle for seeing how effectively the player rotates his pelvis.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Again, you can't necessarily see that quite so clearly from front on. When that line is put in place and the player starts moving, I would expect the right hip to be inside of that line at the top of the back, which it is in this example.
So that's super helpful, because that's kind of like just the basics, blocking and tackling. From your perspective of a student in front of you, here's the angles of camera. Here's the analysis tools that I'm going to go through. I mean, we don't have to get into the details of you're trying to fix or work with this particular golfer. But maybe let's jump to, then what? Like, what's next after this? You've got these videos, you're ready to rock and roll. Yeah, here we go.
So we're gonna look at down the line. First thing I'm going to draw up is the shaft plane. My baseline there is somewhere between the belt buckle and the belly button. The higher you go, a bit more draw bias. The lower you go, a bit more fade bias. We know that this player wants to swing it left to hit it straight, so he's roughly at the top of his belt buckle there, so a slightly low hand position. Other things I'm looking for, I'll take a line from the middle of the pelvis and drop it straight down, and I would expect that to sit directly over the ankle joint. I know that there's some coaches out there that use the back of the lead shoulder as a measure for balance, or as a guideline for balance, and it should cut through the knees. Personally, I don't see that working for all builds of player. Whereas the middle of the pelvis over the ankle joint is pretty functional for all standards of player. I will also look for the player to present with their natural curve. So this player, Gus, he's a proper athlete. He looks after himself. He's physically in really nice shape. So you'd expect him to present with more of this type of posture. But if, like me, turning into an old guy, where my posture is deteriorating, I can't create that posture and move. So my baseline here becomes very individual. Are they presenting their standing posture over the golf ball, rather than adhering to a model posture? And this is where I'll use the skeleton feature. I'll drop a line down from the trail shoulder, and my baseline there is that the butt end of the club hits that line.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not looking for the arms to be vertical. Yes, there are exceptions. There are guys like Jim Furyk, Marcel Steen, who have the arms literally hanging vertically down, but I don't see that with many players. Generally, I'll see angle in this regard from the majority of effective golf swings.
Okay.
Again, just from a simple alignments perspective, I'm looking at, if I'm looking down the line from this view, I don't want to see more of one leg than the other, if that makes sense. So basically the shin bones are parallel to the line of play, the thigh is parallel, the pelvis is parallel, the rib cage is parallel. For a neutral shot, I would expect to see just a little bit of lead forearm. If that was more of a fade shot, you'd probably see the lead forearm underneath the trail forearm. For a more exaggerated draw, you'd probably see more of the lead forearm above the trail forearm.
Yeah.
That is basically my start position analysis. And it's
That's
done every
yeah.
time. This ties in with my coaching beliefs, my principles, my philosophies, that we know that the industry talks a great deal about how important start position is. Yet all we're doing is coaching the same start position to everyone. It's fundamentally not the case. You can shift impact geometry massively through start position alone. Very subtle changes. Remember that start position dictates two things: the impact geometry and the movement options. That doesn't mean the player is going to use the movement options, but you've at least got to give them a chance.
Mm.
So I'm always going P1, P7, P1, P7. What is it about impact that he's presenting with? Can I fix that through start position alone? It's a non-invasive change. And in 99% of the cases, you will see an improvement in impact data purely through changing start position. I know with this player as an example that if I stand the handle up at start position, get the right arm underneath the forearm more and lean the handle forward, that -4 swing direction will become a 0 swing direction straight away.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not exclusive to good players. Clearly, Gussie is a very good player. He's a multiple tournament winner in PGA level golf in the UK. He's a very, very good player. But geometry and physics doesn't know the idiot at the other end of the golf club.
Hi, I'm the idiot at the end of the golf club. Yeah. You're right, though.
Geometry and
Yeah.
physics are fixed. So using the start
Yeah.
position is absolutely crucial, I think. As I said, this plays into my coaching preferences and principles. But if you're going to use start position as a means to improve impact geometry and movement, you have to have a baseline to start from.
Spot on. Yes, there's nothing I can add to that. I mean, not that anyone logged on to hear me add anything to that, but you're exactly right. If we're not set up properly, if we're not starting properly, that's the P1 position, right? If we're not ready to go, everything
Right.
else can be completely off. Yeah.
But we also need to get P1 right with the camera.
You're right. And I'm glad you just mentioned camera. Let's take a 30-second commercial break and answer some of these questions. How about that? So
Cool.
one of the questions that pops in is, are you using certain cameras or just iPhones? I would also throw in iPads. So I think I know the answer to that, Hugh, but what about your recording? Are you just using iPad iPhones?
Yes. So basically my process is everything's connected to the Wi-Fi in my studio. So I record on iPhone using the iRange monopod. I record on
Mhm.
iPhone and trim it up on iPhone. Straight away it gets shared to my iPad, which is connected to my TV. So the reason historically that I've used iPhone and then transferred it to the iPad is that the camera quality and the shutter speed was more accessible on iPhone. I don't think that's the case anymore. But I find that using an iPad to film is clumsy in my experience. So I've got this seamless process where as soon as it's been recorded and logged on my phone, it's already on my iPad. I can go over to my iPad and then I'm straight away ready to start drawing, and the images appear on the TV.
Love it. Love it. That's a good question. Another one is, and this is a great one. I don't know if we've used it. Sounds like you're only using one iPhone. to record? You're doing just a single face on single. Have you ever messed around with multicam? Is one of the questions.
No, but I'd love to. That's a
Yeah,
project
and
for the.
yeah, always difficult to try something new in the midst of busy and lessons. So definitely
Well,
something
I
we
think
can.
that, I mean, I'm a great. I mean, it should be fairly obvious by now that I'm a great believer in using technology in coaching because I want to be able to measure accurately. And if I can, why would I guess it if I can measure it?
Mm,
But every time I integrate any new technology into my coaching, it's generally about the 1st of October that I'll integrate it. And
mhm.
for example, I started using force plates literally first of October last year. I got data for 6 months before I started giving golf lessons on them.
Wow.
Just want to get used to it because the experience for the player, you gain so much credibility as a coach, the more seamless your process is.
That's mastering it, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
mastering your tools. So when you're
Correct.
presenting them to your students, they're getting the most
Correct.
value out of it. That's fair.
Correct.
I love that. Well, so far we've done really well. We've answered a good bit of these questions. We've talked about recording and angles. We've talked about your tools and analyzing. Now let's talk about the share aspect. And I would also
Mm-hmm.
throw in when we're talking about sharing, if we look super quick at what you've got, some 15, almost 16,000 videos you've taken.
Have I
How are
really?
you? Yeah, 15. You've got about 10,000 videos private, 10,256. So right around 15,800-ish, plus or
And you
minus.
and you know what?
Uh,
Only 14,000 of them are Torbjorn Olesen.
all right.
He liked to look at golf swing.
I love that. Um, but we're getting to the share piece. So maybe talk to us a little bit about how
Mm-hmm.
you share videos. And I think we would love to learn your tagging system or your titling and things like that.
Okay, so let's start with the tagging system, which I think is again fundamental to great coaching because
Mm,
one of the primary uses of video is to be able to make comparison against previous golf swings, maybe comparison against other players, although I'm reluctant to do that, particularly with club players. You need to know what you're comparing.
mhm.
And again, just to go back and talk about sort of poor lesson experiences when you've got the coach scrolling through, say, I know there's a film. Oh, there we go. That's it. That isn't an effective way of running your business aside from anything else. If you compare this to the medical profession, you would kind of hope that the doctor knew exactly what you were working on the previous time.
Mhm.
You would kind of hope that the medication he prescribed 6 weeks ago, he knew what that was. I don't think golf coaching is any different. This is just being an ethical golf coach. So if we were to go into, I'm just trying to figure out who I've seen recently that we can look at. Um, this is a really interesting. So this guy, fascinating background, which I won't go into, but basically he was in a very bad car accident, smashed his legs
Mm.
up, and became an Olympic sprinter, Paralympian sprinter, and then turned into a golfer. Now, same camera angle, number one. Number two, very clear to him when he logs on what we worked on. So every time the first swings, and I explain this to every student, the first swings from every session will be tagged before. I'll always tag the club because I want to be able to cross-reference it against my TrackMan data. And then I will keep the descriptions very short. So, for example, left pressure. We
Mhm.
were trying to, and they were his terms. So I think this is really quite an important thing. But quite often when we coach, you'll ask a student to do something and they'll tag it themselves. They'll come up with a name for it themselves. I'll generally try and use that when I'm tagging the videos. So he knows what he's looking for. He knows the points of difference, and then I'll put in the chat what he has to take away. That's basically my sharing
Mm.
process. Now I've got two ways of doing this. Number one, when I'm doing it in note form, it's really important that it's bullet points. If you're going to ask them to do drills, give them specifics, give them feedback loops. So in this instance, I want to get this player hitting down on it more. He practices off grass more than mats, so I've got him hitting off a tee, and the target is to break the tee. If he breaks the tee or drives the tee forward, he's probably done a decent job. If he hits a nice shot, but he's just picked it off the top of the tee, he's probably done an ordinary job.
Mm-hmm.
I'll generally point out to them the shot shape bias that I would like them to see. So if he does a good job, he tends to hit really nice pulls. They're properly, solidly struck golf shots. I want the player to develop consistency with something so that I've then got the opportunity to coach that into something a bit more functional. So that would be, and the tagging on my on TrackMan is exactly the same. So the tagging on TrackMan will be left pressure here, because that's what we were working on. The other means I have of communicating with players is to give them some kind of feedback. So I use this as a comparison for David versus this other player, because they want to hit the same shot shape and they're very similar builds. That's generally the only instance that I'll use comparisons. And also, David used to play on tour. Mark is probably the best ball striker I've seen outside of tour golf. So it's a reasonably fair comparison. And then it will be, I mean, I don't know how long this one was, but generally I don't want these to be any longer than a minute. That's a minute 35. He's a mate of mine, and there's probably a little bit of trash talk in there before I get going. But generally I want the videos to be short and sweet, for the simple reason that we know people switch off after a while. If you compare your sort of experience on Instagram or on social media, and you sort of think, oh, holy cow, that video is 5 minutes long, I'm not going to watch that, it's too much effort. Their golfers are the same. I'm also quite I'll push the players to find out what the best means of communicating with them is. So obviously through the notifications feature on Onform, I can get I know whether they've looked at the video or not. So if I've put together a video for someone for 3 or 4 lessons in a row and he's not watched it, I'm just going to say, listen, Nate, I want to help you here. I want to give you everything you need to get better. And I know you're not watching the videos, so is there a better way to do it?
Yeah, you're holding them accountable, right?
Correct. But equally, I'm not going to waste my time doing it if there's a better way of doing it for the student. And quite often you'll get the students who go, I really love the videos, but I don't like the notes, or vice versa. Some people don't sign up to Onform. I will still give them a little review video or notes and send them to them in WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So it really is. I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and sort of advocate the joy of using Onform, but I've been using Onform for a ton of time before you and I ever met, because it's simply the best tool for doing everything I need it to. And it does what I need it to do incredibly well. What do I need to do? I be able to video it, store it, analyze it, diagnose it, share it with the student. I don't need it to do anything more. I think the skeleton feature is really cool because it's helped me. It's given me another sort of string to my bow in terms of analysis. And that's certainly, maybe we can do another one of these, and I can talk a little bit more about how I analyze golf swings from a movement perspective. I find the skeleton really, really useful for that. But I don't need it to do any more.
And you just summed up the reason why we built Onform. We want to keep something so simple that helps coaches like you every day who have almost 16,000 videos just saying, I just need it to do X, Y, and Z. I don't need it to do everything. Now, I mentioned earlier, we're building on, and some coaches want extra features and functions, which is fantastic, but I want to be able to record, analyze some lines, and then share it. That's it. That's kind of our tagline.
And you know what? As you add features to it, there'll be some that I definitely integrate because they add to the quality of what I'm doing. And I think, this is more of a general coaching message and a sort of development message for coaches, that when did I see you? January? This has evolved since January. because I'm always looking for a slightly better way to either analyze, diagnose, or communicate my message. And I'm sure in a year's time it'll look slightly different still. But the great thing that I've found for my own coaching is that the more forensic a detail I start to analyze golf swings, the more different ways I find to use the technology to illustrate my point.
You're you and several other coaches, a lot of coaches are the reason that you have seen some changes today than when we spoke last in person in January.
Mm-hmm.
We talk, you say, man, I'd love this feature, or it'd be great if we could do. And on the left-hand side, that recent activity came from a lot of other coaches saying, I'd love to have one central location of where. So we take this feedback, we talk with our development team and go, what of these things can we implement to make it better? Still simple for coaches that just need the basics,
Mm-hmm.
and then add the advanced pieces as well. Maybe a couple other
And
questions, Hugh, before we wrap this up, because it's
I'd love to.
I know I'm loving this. We've got some great participation here. One of the questions in your tagging, do you use standard stuff like DTL downline or face on or spectator or iron, or do you just kind of keep a before and after when you're talking tagging?
Um, I can see it. I don't need to. But
Fair
yeah,
enough.
I think that if generally I'm going straight into the client's page, and if I have so for an example, this player here, this is the again, you can see the tagging, but there's instances where we've got, if he's got a model draw set up, I'm going to highlight that. If he's got
Okay.
model swing, I'm going to highlight that so I can go in and search that way. But I don't really want to see a video. I mean, one of the things that really irritates me about video analysis is that all you ever get sent is down the line videos. I need to see down the line and front on, because ultimately, although down the line is telling you what is happening, you're going to get an awful lot of pointers as to why it's happening from front on. So I always want to be able to cross-reference the two.
Hmm. Love that. That was a good one. The person who asked that, I hope that answered your question. I mean,
Mm,
he was pretty straightforward. This is face on. This is down the
yeah,
line. I think it makes sense for where they were asking of in Mark's workspace here. If he wanted to go search for DTL, you certainly could
yeah,
add that tag, and he could
correct,
find all
correct.
as his 60 videos,
Yeah,
grows.
I literally, I mean, I'm inventing tags all the time. I use the title feature for my tagging.
Hmm, okay.
So I'll tag the club, but the title will be what the focus or emphasis was.
Yeah, I see fade ball position, big pelvis turn. It's a
Yeah.
1 second video, right? I love that. That's awesome. Here's another one. Thanks for everything, and welcome the opportunity to see the next session with Hugh and how he looks at the swing motion. Man, we're getting people wanting you to come back, Hugh. I'm already loving this.
You've got one person that wants me to come back.
Hey, that's a great webinar. The three of us will get on a Zoom call. I think this is fantastic. Um, Man, this has been so helpful. I hope, and it looks like from the participation from those who have certainly joined us and asked questions and interacted with us, I think that it's been helpful. Anytime we can get time with you, I love your methodology. I love the way you break down things. I love more than anything how you want to master a technology before you present it. I think that speaks volumes about your coaching ethic. And on behalf of Onform and everyone, we've greatly appreciated the partnership and the friendship between the two of us, and just the ability to continue to learn from you and grow. So it's been fantastic.
Well, yeah, thank you. I think it's as I said, I'm a huge fan of Onform, and contrary to what some of the audience might think, I'm not paid to say that. You've been an incredible support to me, and I think, like my relationship with my two other partners, Trackman and Smart to Move, the I think the single biggest thing that attracts me to these brands is their constant desire to improve what they have, and the fact that they'll listen to their market to do it.
Mm, yeah, that's if you're not innovating, you're dying, or something like that. I've heard that once before,
Yeah,
right?
way smarter people than us have said that.
100%, right? Yeah. Well, Hugh, I appreciate your time. I know we've actually ran over what we thought we would do. We thought this would be about a 30-ish minute, and here we are 50 minutes in having a fantastic conversation. And some of the feedback that I'm trying to catch up on is has been very positive. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much for carving out time at the end of your day to join us. We genuinely appreciate it. Just for everyone to know, we will send out the recording of this webinar. We'll post this to our social media channel on YouTube so you can watch it and pause it and copy all the lines that Hugh does. Please take the time to visit Hugh's website and connect with him on Instagram. He is fantastic at social media, posting things, and I know a lot. I read a lot of the comments, and a lot of coaches do appreciate that. So, on behalf of Onform and Hugh, we do appreciate everyone joining us. Thanks so much for your time, and we hope you all have a great day.
Yes, a great pleasure, Nate. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Appreciate it.